Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel Best IT Solution, and this is a continuous series of my previous tutorial. So in this previous tutorial we have discussed the most asking microservice questions in interview. So in this tutorial also we have discussed some more interview questions regarding the microservices. So these questions are mostly asking in the interview for freshers and experience also. Okay, so this is the interview questions of part 2 of microservice. So our first question is, so what is API gateway? So in microservice, what is the role of the API gateway and what is API gateway? So API gateway is a special class of microservice that meets the need of a single client application such as Android app, web app, Angular JS app, iPhone app, etc. and provide it with single entry point to the backend resources, providing cross-cutting concerns to them such as security, monitoring, matrices, and resiliency. Okay, so API gateway is a special class of microservice. It is also a microservice that meets the need of a single client application. So it provides a single entry point to the backend resources. So all the requests which are coming from the front end, first it is hits to the API gateway. Then it is the responsible of API gateway to migrate the request to the particular services. This is also a service, microservice. So we need to add the API gateway dependency to the service. As a result, this service can be work as a API gateway. So client application can access tens or hundreds of microservices concurrently with each request, aggregating the response and transforming them with the client application needs. Okay, so the client applications can access the tens or hundreds of microservices through this API gateway, because the API gateway is a middleman for the all the other services. So API gateway can use a client-side load balancer library also. So you can say also this can work as a load balancer. API gateway can use a client-side load balancer to distribute loads across instance based on the round-robin fashion. So based on the round-robin algorithm, the API gateway also balance the load between the services. It distribute the load across the different instances. So it can also protocol translation, that is HTTP to AMQP if necessary. It can handle security for protected resources as well. So it can also handle the security protect this is it can also handle the security for protected resources as well. So what are the features of API gateway? So the main features of API gateway we can say Spring Cloud Discovery Client Integration, Spring Cloud Discovery Client Integration, request rate limiting. Okay, so this is also an feature, path rewriting and strict circuit breaker integration for resiliency. Okay, so these are the features of the API gateway. So next question is, what is circuit breaker pattern? So this is very important. The circuit breaker is also very important point of the microservices. So what is the circuit breaker pattern? So microservices often need to make remote network calls to another microservices running in a different process. Network calls can fail due to many reasons. Okay, so the in microservices technology there are a number of hundred of microservices are there. So there are many times it is a needs of one microservice calls the another microservice. Okay, so often need to make a remote network calls to another microservices running in different processes. Okay, so different processes what are microservice running, one microservice always communicating or calling the another microservice. Okay, so network calls can fail. So these calls can fail due to different reasons. Okay, like brittle nature of the network itself, remote processing hung. So there are different reasons to fail the remote calls of the microservice. So the first one is the brittle nature of the network itself. The remote processing is hung, or too much traffic on the target microservices that it can handle. So what there is too much traffic to the particular microservices, whatever that can be handled. So beyond the limit of the that can handle the call of the service. This can lead to cascading failures in the calling services due to threads being blocked in the hung remote calls. A circuit breaker is a piece of software that is used to solve this problem. Okay, so a circuit breaker is a piece of software that is used to solve this problem. The basic idea is very simple. Wrap a potentially failing remote call in a circuit breaker object that will monitor for failures and timeouts. Okay. So the basic idea behind the circuit breaker is it is simple. It is simply wrap a potentially failing remote call in a circuit breaker object that will monitor for failures and timeouts. So once the failure reaches a certain threshold, the circuit breaker trips and all further calls to the circuit breaker return with an error without the protected call being made at all. Okay. So once the failure reaches a certain threshold, so there is a time bound we have mentioned in circuit breaker. So once that time reaches, the circuit breaker trips and all further calls to the circuit breaker return with a error message without the protected call being made at all. So this mechanism can protect the cascading effects of a single component failure in the system and provide the options of gracefully downgrade the functionality. So typical circuit breaker implementation. How can we implement circuit breaker? So circuit breaker implementation is like has a REST client calls the recommendation service which further communicates with book service using a circuit breaker call wrapper. As soon as the book service API call starts to fail, circuit breaker will trip. It is open. That means when it will trip means that is open. The circuit breaker and will not make any further call to the book service until the circuit is closed. So as much as time the circuit breaker is closed, that at that time we can call that services. But once the circuit is open, at the then we cannot any call, make a call to the particular service. So this is a diagrammatic representation of the circuit breaker. Okay, so when a call happen to the particular services, it will if the service is not available, it will trip. That means it will open and no further call is allowed to the circuit breaker till it is closed the circuit. And when the circuit is again closed, you can make do the call to that particular service. Okay, so another thing is important question is how does Eureka server work? Okay, so in microservice technology, the Eureka server is very important thing. So how does the Eureka server work? We should know this thing. So there are two main components in Eureka project, that is Eureka server and Eureka client. So in microservice project there are two main components of Eureka. That is one is Eureka server and another is Eureka client. So what is Eureka server? So all these are the services. Eureka server is also a service. Eureka clients are also the service. But the Eureka server service means the central server one per zone that acts as a service registry. Eureka server can act as a service registry. All microservices register with the Eureka server during app bootstrap. Okay, so during the app bootstrap, all these other microservices should register on this Eureka server. And Eureka client means the Eureka also comes with a Java based client component, the Eureka client, which makes interactions with the service much easier. So with the help of this Eureka client, so Eureka also comes with a Java based client component, the Eureka client, which makes interactions with the service much easier. Okay, so we need to add the dependency to the to make a service as a Eureka client. Also we need to add dependency for Eureka server to make a service as a Eureka server. So there are Eureka server dependency also there. There are also Eureka client dependency also there. So we need to add all the dependency to the our form.xml file. The client also has a built-in load balancer that does basic round-robin load balancing. Okay, see the client, this Eureka client also built-in inbuilt, that is load balancer, that follows the round-robin load balancing technique. Each microservice in the distributed ecosystem must include this client to communicate and register with the Eureka server. So each microservice, if there are hundred of microservices there, so each microservice must be registered with the Eureka server to communicate with each other. Okay, so there are only one server, Eureka server is there. All the microservices should be registered with that Eureka server. As a while this distributed ecosystem, all the services can communicate with each other. So typical use case for Eureka. So there is usually one Eureka server cluster per region. Okay, so there is usually one Eureka server cluster per region. Region like US region, Asia region, Europe region, Australia region. In all these regions, there is only one Eureka server is there, which knows only about instances in its region. So this Eureka server knows only the registered instances in its region. Services register with Eureka, and then these send heartbeats to the renew their lease every 30 seconds. If the service cannot renew the release for a few times, it is taken out of service registry in about 90 seconds. Okay, so if the service registry is not registered in that particular time period, it will removed out from the registry about 90 seconds. So the registration information and the renewals are replicated to all the Eureka nodes in the cluster. So the registration information and the renewals are replicated to all the Eureka nodes in the cluster. The clients from any zone can look up the registry information happens every 30 seconds to locate their services which could be in the any zone and make remote calls. Eureka clients are built to handle the failure of one or more Eureka server. Okay, so Eureka clients are built in to handle the failure of one or more Eureka servers. Since Eureka clients have the registry cache information in them, they can operate reasonably well even when all of the Eureka servers go down. So this is the implementation of Eureka server and Eureka client. So another important question is what is Hystrix? So Hystrix is a Netflix implementation for circuit breaker pattern that also employs bulkhead design pattern by operating each circuit breaker within its own thread pool. Okay. So Hystrix is a Netflix implementation for circuit breaker pattern that also employs bulkhead design pattern by operating each circuit breaker within its own thread pool. It also collects many useful metrics about the circuit breaker's internal state. So, okay. So, the history also collects the many useful metrics, parameters about the circuit breaker internal state. So, about the circuit breaker internal state, the history also collects the useful metrics. Okay. So, these include what are the parameters it collects, that is the traffic volume, the request volume, the error percentage, the host reportings, and the latency percentiles, success, failures, and rejections. Okay, so these are the parameters or metrics which are recorded by the sticks from the circuit breaker: the traffic volume, request volume, error percentage, host reporting, latency percentile, success, failures, and rejections. Okay. So all these metrics can be aggregated using another Netflix OSS project called Turbine. Okay, so all these metrics can be aggregated using another Netflix OSS project called Turbine. So Hystrix dashboard can be used to visualize these aggregated metrics. So Hystrix dashboard can be used. So Hystrix also provided dashboard. So this Hystrix dashboard can be used to visualize the aggregated metrics, providing excellent visibility into the overall health of these distributed systems. Okay. So whatever the metrics that is collected by the Hystrix, so in the Hystrix dashboard we can visualize all these metrics and it provides an excellent visibility into the overall health of the distributed systems. Okay. Hystrix can be used to specify the fallback method for execution in case of the actual method call fails. So if a particular actual method call fails, that can be also Hystrix we can specify in the Hystrix dashboard that the particular service is down or service cannot be called. So this can be useful for graceful degradation of functionality in case of failure in remote invocation. Okay. So this strict dashboard is very useful for graceful degradation of functionality in case of failure in remote invocation. So in case of remote invocation, this strict is very helpful to monitor the status of the application. So how to use Hystrix? So we need to add the dependency of Hystrix to the our POM. If we are using the Maven, then we need to add the dependency of Hystrix to the pom.xml file. Or if we will use the Gradle, then we also add the dependency to the Gradle file. Spring framework.cloud.spring cloud starter Hystrix, and we need to enable the circuit breaker in main application, like enable circuit breaker, and the at the rest controller, the Spring Boot applications, we need to annotate with this. We need to mention these annotations for Hystrix. Okay, so using Hystrix command fallback method executions. So there is a Hystrix command notation there to execute the fallback method. So public string. Okay, public string reading list, and the URI equal to URI.create and the endpoint, we need to call for that strings. So return this dot rest template get for objects URI string dot class. So this is a rest call to other services. So using @strings command annotation, we specify the fallback method to execute in case of exceptions, and fallback method should have the same signature return type as that of the original method. So using the @strings command annotation, we specify the fallback method to execute in case of exception. Fallback method should have the same signature return type as that of the original method. Okay. This method provides a graceful fallback behavior while the circuit is in the open or a half open state. So while the circuit breaker circuit is open or half open state, this fallback method provides a graceful fallback behavior while circuit is open. So what is Web API? Give an example. So Web API is a platform for building web applications that can be accessed over the internet. So the Web API is a platform for building web applications that can be accessed over the internet. So it provides a way for client-side applications to communicate with server-side applications, making it possible to develop cross-platform applications. Okay. So this Web API provides a way for client-side applications to communicate with the server-side application. So with the help of this Web API, the client-side applications can communicate with the server-side applications and making it possible to develop cross-platform applications. So with the help of this Web API, we can also develop the cross-platform applications. So there are many different type of web APIs, but some common examples include databases, payment processors, and social media platforms. So these are the common examples of the web API. Now, in order to use the web API, developers need to first register with the provider and obtain an API key. So in order to use this web API, developer need to first register with the providers of the API and obtain a API key. With the help of this API key only, that developers can communicate with this particular service API of the service. This key is used to authenticate request made to the API. Okay, so this API key is used to make an authenticated request. Once registered, developers can use the API to access data or perform actions to behalf of the user. So, for example, a developer could use the Twitter API to display the user's timeline on their website. Okay, so a developer can use the Twitter API to display the user's timeline on their website. So, to display the user's timeline on their particular websites, that user can use the Twitter API. So, for that user should before call the API, that user should authenticate with the help of this Twitter API key. So to get the API key from the Twitter, that user should register on the Twitter to get the API key, and with the help of this API key only, the users can make a authenticate request to get the user's data, user's timeline on their website. So alternatively, they could use the Stripe API to process payments made through their online store. So by using web APIs, developers can easily add powerful functionality to their applications without having to build everything from scratch. So with the help of this web API, so developers can easily add powerful functionality to their applications without having to build everything from scratch. So we need not to build everything from the scratch. Suppose in our applications there is a need of payment process. So we need not to develop the payment process functionality in our application. So we can just call the web APIs of the payment process from any vendor. we can make the payment functionality. So what is REST API client service constraint? So when talking about the client server constraint of REST API, we are referring to the separation of concerns that is inherent in the architecture. So this is linked with the separation of concerns, that is client and server. This is separation of concerns that is inherent to the architecture. The client is responsible for the user interface while the server is responsible for storing and retrieving the data. So the client is responsible in this client server constraint. The client is responsible for the user interface, that is the UI or the user interface, while the server is responsible for storing and retrieving the data from the database or from the any other services. This separation of concerns allows for a more modular approach to develop, and it also makes it easier to scale an application. Okay, so this separation of concern, this client server constraint, separation of concerns allows for a more modular approach to development. So it allows a more modular approach to the development, and it also makes it easier to scale an application. When an application grows too large for a single server to handle, it can be divided up to multiple smaller services, each running on its own server. Okay. So when an application grows time to time and it becomes too large for a single server to handle, it at that time it can be divided into multiple smaller services and each running on its own server. So instead of running a large application in a single server, it can be divided into multiple smaller services and each smaller service can run it on its own server. So this horizontally scalable architecture is one of the key benefits of using a REST API. So this horizontally scalable architecture is one of the key benefits of using the REST API. Okay. So our next question is, what is service registry? So this is also very frequently asking questions in interview. What is service registry and which service registry we are using in our microservice architecture mostly. So a service registry is a database for the storage of data structures for applications level communication. Okay. The service registry is a database for the storage of the data structures for application level communications. It serves as a central location where app developers can register and find the schemas used for the particular app. So it serves as a central location. The service registry acts as a central location where app developers can register and find the schemas used for the particular app. Okay, so we are using mostly the Eureka server as the service registry, because in Eureka server we are registering all the other microservices registered in the Eureka server. Okay, so Eureka server can work as a service registry. What is fallback method? So fallback provides an alternative solution during a service request failure. So what is fallback method? So fallback provides an alternative solution during a service request failure. So when a request comes from the user and the request is failed to provide the service, at that time the fallback method provides an alternative solution. When the circuit breaker trips and the circuit is open, a fallback logic can be started. Okay, so when the circuit breaker trips and the circuit is open, a fallback logic is automatically executing. The fallback logic typically does little or no processing and return a value. The fallback logic typically does a little bit things, or it has no processing and return a value. Fallback logic must have little chance of failing because it is running as a result of a failure to begin with. Okay, so the fallback logic must have a little chances to failure, because in case of failure only the fallback logic is executing. So because it is running as a result of failure to begin with. So each service that's wrapped by a certain breaker can implement a fallback using one of the following three approaches. Okay, so each microservice that's wrapped by a circuit breaker can implement a fallback using one of the following three approaches. So there are three approaches to implement that fallback method. So each service should be wrapped with a circuit. Each service which is wrapped with a circuit breaker that are linked with a fallback method. So when the circuit is open or unable to call that service, at that time this fallback method will execute automatically. Okay. So there are three approaches to call this fallback method. So one is custom fallback, another is fail silent, another is fail fast. So custom fallback. What is custom fallback? So in some cases, a service client library provides a fallback method we can invoke, or in other cases we can use locally available data on an API server. Example, a cookie or a local JVM cache to generate a fallback response. So in custom fallback method, in some cases a service client library provides a fallback method we can invoke, or in other cases we can use locally available data on an API server. Okay, so to generate the fallback response. Okay, so this is one type of custom fallback response. So with the help of this API server, we will generating the fallback method in custom fallback. Another is fail silent. In this case, the fallback method simply returns a null value. So in fail silent fallback concept, a fallback method simply returns a null value, which is useful in the data provided by the service being invoked, is optional for the response that will be sent back to the requesting client. Okay, so when the requesting client got the null value from the as a response, you can understand that thing that comes from the fallback method. And particular service is not executing successfully, and it returns a null value to the requesting client. So fail silent means in this case the fallback method simply returns a null value to the client, which is useful if the data provided by the service being invoked is optional for the response that will be sent back to the requesting client. So another concept is fail fast. So in this case it used in cases where the data is required or there is no good fallback and results in a client getting a 500 response. Okay, so the fail fast fallback method executed when the used in cases where the data is required. So where the data is compulsory, mandatory, required, or there is no good fallback and results in client getting a 500 or 5 series response, that is internal server error. At that time this fail fast fallback method will execute it. So this can negatively affect the device UX, which is not ideal, but it keeps API servers healthy and allows the system to recover quickly when the failing service becomes available again. Okay, so this fail fast concept advantage is like that. This can negatively affect the device UX, which is not ideal, but it keeps API servers healthy. It keeps the API servers healthy and allows the system to recover quickly automatically when the failing service becomes available again. So when the failing service becomes available again, then automatically it will call that service with the help of this fail fast fallback concept. What is the YML file for microservices? So YML is a valuable tool for both microservices and Kubernetes, as it provides a simple human readable way to manage the configuration of this technology. Okay. So this YML is a valuable tool for both microservices and Kubernetes. So we are using YML for microservice, for Kubernetes, for Docker. So this is a configuration file. Whatever the configuration we want to give to our application, we are giving in the that configuration in the YML file. So this YML file is a very important, valuable tools for both microservices and Kubernetes, as it provides a simple, human readable way to manage the configuration. Okay, this is a configuration file, but in YML file we can configure in a very simple and human readable way. Okay. So Kubernetes uses YML files to manage and automate the deployment. Okay, so the Kubernetes uses the YML files to manage and automate the deployment, scaling, and management of the containerized application. Okay, so to manage the deployment, scaling of the applications, and management of the containerized applications, Kubernetes uses this YML file. Another thing is, what is the use of YML file in Docker? So YML file allows you to configure and document all your application service dependencies. Okay. So this YML file allows you to configure and document all your application service dependencies, other services, cache database, queues, etc. So all these configurations we are mentioning in this YML file. So using the Docker Compose CLI command, you can create and start one or more containers for each dependency with a single command. So if we are giving the particular configurations in the YML file, and then using the docker compose CLI command we can create and start one or more containers for each dependency with a single command, that is docker compose of. Okay, so the YML file is also very important for the docker also. What is circuit breaker resilience forge? So resilience forge is a lightweight, easy to use fault tolerance library for Java 8 and functional programming. So the resilience forge is a lightweight, easy to use fault tolerance library for Java 8 and functional programming. The circuit breaker is one of the main features provided by this resilience forge. So the circuit breaker is one of the main features properties which is provided by this resilience force. So it is used to stop cascading failures in a distributed system and provide fallback options. So this resilience force is used to stop the cascading failures in a distributed systems and provide fallback options. Okay. So cascading failures means if the parent service is failed, then the all the child services are automatically failed. So this is a cascading failure. So to stop this cascading failures, this resilience for the use a very important role. So what is Zipkin in microservices? So Zipkin is a distributed log tracing system. So in microservice, Zipkin is very much used for tracing the log in distributed systems. So it helps gather timing data needed to troubleshoot latency problems in microservice architecture. Okay, so Zipkin is used to gather the timing data needed to troubleshoot latency problems in microservice architecture. So it manages both the collection and lookup of this data. So the Zipkin manages both the collection and lookup of this data. So another thing is related to Zipkin, that is sleuth. So what is this sleuth framework used for? So sleuth configures everything you need to get started. So our sleuth is configures everything you need to get started. So this includes where trace data spans are reported to, so how many traces to keep sampling, if report fields baggage are sent, and which libraries are traced. So all these things, that is the tracing information, all these are done by this sleuth. So this in a sleuth configures everything you need to get started. So this includes where the trace data and are reported to, how many traces are keep records, if remotes failed, if remote fields are sent, and which libraries are traced. All these are reported by this sleuth. So what is the difference between Zipkin and sleuth? So these two are alternatively used. So what is the difference between them, the Zipkin and sleuth? So in this article, we will look at how to use Spring Cloud Sleuth and Zipkin to implement distributed log tracing. So Spring Cloud Sleuth is used to collect the trace information. So Spring Cloud Sleuth is used to collect the trace information, and Zipkin is used for the storage and visualize of these traces. Okay, so these two are different things. So Sleuth is used to collect the trace information of the microservices, and this Zipkin is used to the storage and the visualization of these traces. So how we can visualize or see this trace information with the help of the Zipkin in the Zipkin console or Zipkin dashboard, we can see the trace information which is collected by the sleuth. So log tracing in microservices. So logging is the process of printing information or errors from an application to analyze what happened within that application. Whereas distributed tracing is the process of tracing a request from the first microservice until the last one it travels to find out where the failure has happened. So the logging and the log tracing, these two are the different things in the microservice. Okay, so logging is the process of the general logging, whatever we are using the log4j or logback or slf4j. So these are logging techniques. So this is logging is the process of printing information or errors from an application to analyze what happened within that application. So what is happening within that applications to analyze these things, the logs are generated in the consoles or in the log file. But the distributed log tracing is the process of tracing the request. But distributed log tracing is the process of tracing the request from the first microservice to the last one, up to which microservice the request has traveled, to find out the whole log between the all services, to find out the where the failure has happened. So with the help of this log tracing we can find out the actually in which services the request has failed. So the distributed log tracing is the process of tracing a request from the first microservice until the last one. It travels to find out where the failure has happened. What is a CI/CD pipeline? Okay, so the CI/CD means continuous integration and continuous deployment. So in CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment, it is a series of steps that must be performed in order to deliver a new version of software. So in CI/CD series, this is a series of steps in CI/CD pipeline. This is a series of steps that must be performed in order to deliver a new version of the software. So this is continuous integration, continuous deployment. CI/CD pipelines are practice focused on improving software delivery throughout the software development lifecycle via automation. So CI/CD pipelines are a practice focused on improving the software delivery throughout the software development lifecycle via automation. So via automation we are managing the software development with the software delivery. Both are managed by this CI/CD pipeline. Software delivery throughout the software development. So by automating the CI/CD throughout the development, testing, production and monitoring phases of the software development lifecycle, organizations are able to develop higher quality of code and also develop them faster. So by automating the CI/CD throughout the deployment, testing, production and monitoring phases of the software development lifecycle, organizations are able to develop the higher quality of code in a minimum of time, that is in faster the organization can develop the higher quality of code with the help of this CI/CD. Although it's possible to manually execute each of these steps of a CI/CD pipeline, the true value of CI/CD pipelines is realized through automation. So we can also, it is possible to manually execute each of the steps of the CI/CD pipeline, but if we are doing this manually, we cannot feel the true value of the main importance of the CI/CD pipeline. We cannot feel the actual importance of the CI/CD pipeline. Okay, so to know the true value of the CI/CD pipeline, to realize the we should use this automation. So we need to implement the CI/CD pipeline through automation. What is config server in microservice? So this is also a very important question which is mostly asking what is config server. So config server means this is a central configuration server, provides configurations to each microservice connected. Okay, so if there are, suppose there are 100 of microservices and there are some common configurations of each microservices. So instead of writing these common configurations each microservices every time, so we can keep these common configurations in a particular central configuration server, and we are connecting to each service to that server. So by result, if any modifications need in future, we need not to change each microservice configuration file. We are just changing in the central configuration file, and each microservice are automatically access that updated configuration. Okay. So as mentioned in the above diagram, Spring Cloud Config Server can be used as a central cloud config server by integrating to several environments. So in the Spring Cloud Config Server can be used as a central cloud config server by integrating to several environments. So another question is REST template in microservice. So what is the REST template in microservice? So The REST template is a synchronous REST client which performs HTTP request using a simple template style API. So the REST template is used to call a microservice from another service. So this is used to service call. So with the help of this REST template object, we can call a service from another service. So to make a service to service call, we are using the REST template. So REST template is a synchronous REST client which performs HTTP request using a simple template style API. We can also state that REST template class is a synchronous client and is designed to call REST services. So we can also state that we can also say the REST template class is a synchronous client and is designed to call the REST services. So it is designed to call the REST service. So REST template is used to call the REST service. What is web client in microservice? Okay, so web client is also an interface illustrating the main entry point for performing web requests. So it is illustrating the main entry point for performing the web request. It is also known as the reactive web client, which is introduced in the Spring. Web client also known as reactive web client, which is introduced in Spring version 5. So this new client is a reactive non-blocking solutions that works over the HTTP 1.1 protocol. So this new client is reactive non-blocking solutions that works over the HTTP 1.1 protocol. Okay. So architecture of microservices. So what are the architecture of microservices? So the architecture, simply we can say this is the Spring Cloud Gateway. So the Spring Cloud Gateway is a framework for building microservice based applications, and it provides support for routing and filtering incoming requests to microservices as well as the support for other common features needed to build a microservice architecture. Okay, so in architecture, so this is the architecture diagram of the microservice. So in architecture diagram, you can see this is a API gateway. This is the REST API. All these are all the services, the account service, and this is the inventory service. This is the shipping service. All these are the simple microservices. All these are connected to the account services, connected to the account database, and the inventory service inventory DB, and the shipping service is connected to the shipping DB. And this is the storefront web app. This is our web app which users make a request to this web app, and the request first goes to the each services with the help of this API gateway. So the API, in architecture, the all the includes like the API gateway, the history dashboard, the circuit breaker. All these are implementing in this architecture. So what is Jenkins and why it is used? Okay, so Jenkins is an open source continuous integration or continuous delivery and deployment automation software. So Jenkins is a software which is used generally for the DevOps tool. So it is a DevOps tool which is used for the continuous CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment tool written in the Java programming language. So the Jenkins is a open source continuous integration, continuous delivery and deployment automation software DevOps tools written in the Java programming language. So it is used to implement CI/CD workflows called pipelines. So the Jenkins is mostly used for the CI/CD workflows called pipelines. So for implement the CI/CD pipelines efficiently, we can use this Jenkins tools, automation tools. So difference between YML and YAML. So YML and YML mostly used. YML files are created with the YML and YML file extensions. Both are the same in the interpretation and syntax. So in the case of interpretation and syntax, both these YML and YML are the same, but these are the extensions. We can also write the .YAML or we can write the .YML file. So both are the same in the interpretations and syntax. But nowadays there is no operating system level enforcement, OS system level enforcement to have the 3 letters in extension. Okay, so nowadays the most OS don't support this 3 letter extension. So YML, for that we are moving to most OS support for the YAML. Okay. So most of the YML users are using .yml as their preferred choice. Okay, so instead of writing the YML, most of the users use this .yml extension for the YML. And the difference between YML and properties files. Okay, so we can use both for the configuration. So both are used for the configuration. The format of the application.properties file, it is simple, consisting of key value pairs separated by equal sign. So in properties file, it is very simple and it is writing in the key value pair separated by an equal sign. Okay, suppose we are there is a port, so we can write the server.port. This is the key and the value equal to value is server.port equal to suppose 8080 and the 8080 is the value. So this is the key value pair and different and the separated by an equal sign. And this is the properties file. And the YML file on the other hand, application.yml is a more structured and human readable. So nowadays, so the application properties is depreciated, and mostly we are using the YML file because it is more structured and human readable, using indentation and nested elements to indicate relationship between the elements. So in the YML file, it is more structured and human readable, and using the it follows the indentation and nested elements to indicate the relationship between the elements. So okay, so this is the properties file and the YML file. So what are the another question is, what are the advantages of YML file over the properties file? Okay, so obviously the YML file has the advantages, some advantage than the properties file. So it's much more readable. The YML file is much more readable and it provides enhanced capabilities over the properties files. So therefore, it makes sense to recommend this notation over the properties files configuration. Furthermore, from version 1.2 YML is superset of the JSON, and also with the help of this YML file, so in application profile there are some boilerplate code is there. So in the YML file you need to write the same code again and again because it follows a particular indentation hierarchy. What is distributed log tracing? So distributed log tracing is a method of tracking application requests as they flow from front-end devices to back-end service and the database from start point to end point. Okay, so the travels of the request from the starting to the ending, so the will to the distributed log tracing we can trace this application starters. So developers can use distributed log tracing to troubleshoot requests that exhibit high latency or errors. Okay. So this is the distributed log tracing, and for the distributed log tracing in microservice we are mostly using the Zipkin and sleuth. Sleuth is for tracing the log information, and Zipkin is used for the displaying the visualize the log in the Zipkin dashboard. Okay, so this much in this tutorial. So thank you guys, and if you think that you have got some knowledge from this video, and then please like and share the video with your friends, and please subscribe the channel. Okay, by which I can motivate myself and I can make more and more video regarding this topic for you. Okay, so thank you.